They told us the gateway process was just science, charts, tapes, frequencies. But what if the truth is far darker? What if the CIA's most secret ritual wasn't an experiment at all, but an initiation into forbidden knowledge? The CIA's Forbidden Gateway Ritual, explained in obsessive detail, will take you inside the files they never wanted you to understand, where science and sorcery collide, and the human soul becomes the battlefield. You've heard of mind control, remote viewing, even MK Ultra, but this is the doorway that changes everything. Stay with me, because in the next few minutes, you're going to see how a government obsessed with control stumbled into the same rituals once practiced by shamans and priests and occult orders. And here's the paradox. The very process that could set you free might also be the tool that keeps you enslaved. That's the danger of touching forbidden gates. You never know who's holding the keys. So before we go deeper into this ritual, do one thing. Subscribe to this channel right now, hit the notification bell, and join a community that dares to look where others are too afraid to even glance. Because what we uncover here is knowledge the elites would rather keep buried. And trust me, you don't want to face the gateway without guidance. They say the most dangerous secrets are never shouted, they whisper. And if you lean close enough, you might hear that whisper coming not from ancient temples or forgotten grimoires, but from inside government vaults. The CIA gateway process wasn't presented to the public as a spell or an occult ritual, but those who studied its patterns recognized the bones of something older. Buried under charts, diagrams, and technical jargon was the outline of a rite, a CIA gateway ritual, an initiation into states of consciousness that few dared to touch. The whispering threshold wasn't about politics or warfare, it was about unlocking the hidden architecture of the mind. And once that door cracked open, there was no turning back. Most people assume governments crave control over borders, armies, or economies, but what if the real conquest was the human soul? The gateway process. CIA declassified papers hinted at more than simple experiments. They read like invitations into a hidden temple of thought. Participants were guided through binaural beats, focus techniques, and consciousness manipulation as if they were acolytes in a forbidden initiation. In truth, the so-called gateway process explained less like science and more like scripture, written in the language of frequencies. Imagine walking into a lab expecting electrodes and monitors, only to find you were standing on the edge of a ritual that could tear apart the veil of reality. The scientists involved may have called it an experiment, but the rhythm of the method felt ceremonial. The steps mirrored the cadence of mystery schools, where every sound, every vibration carried symbolic weight. It wasn't just about measuring brainwaves, it was about guiding minds across the abyss. In whispers, some insiders even called it the Forbidden Gateway Ritual, warning that once the resonance aligned, the mind could slip into realms where the rules of physics no longer applied. Think of a staircase in the dark. You don't climb it by accident. You're led step by step into a chamber that has been waiting centuries for someone to return. The gateway process tapes from 1983 may look like relics of outdated science, but listen carefully and you'll notice they hum like liturgies. Each binaural beat acted as a key, each focus session as a mantra, pushing the mind beyond its ordinary limits. You weren't just lying down with headphones, you were engaging in a rite of passage, and rites demand sacrifice, not of blood, but of certainty. To engage in the CIA astral projection experiments meant leaving behind the comfort of the material world, even for a few moments, and walking into the unknown. It was never just research. It was a rehearsal for transcendence. Those who crossed the threshold reported strange things, sensations of floating, detachment from the body, and visions that stretched beyond time. These weren't simply hallucinations triggered by gateway process binaural beats. They felt like rehearsals of death, or perhaps rehearsals of liberation. To the outsider, it seemed clinical, but the initiates knew better. The CIA consciousness experiment was a mask, behind which an older ritual structure was breathing again. Imagine being told you're helping the government with remote viewing, when in reality, you're being baptized into an esoteric gateway process that dissolves everything you thought you were. And so, the question lingers. Was the gateway process CIA declassified document truly a manual for altered states, or was it a modern grimoire disguised as science? Every chart about brain hemispheres, every note on frequencies, looked eerily like the diagrams of hermetic orders, or even the temple blueprints of Egypt. They called it mind expansion, but its undertones echoed with occult signatures. Perhaps the greatest deception wasn't hiding the ritual in science, it was convincing the world it was never a ritual at all. Those who participated were not test subjects. They were initiates who had stumbled into a dark occult CIA secret, masquerading as data, and that whispering threshold didn't exist in a vacuum. It was born in a world where fear ruled, where the Cold War drove nations to claw at every possible edge, nuclear, technological, and yes, even metaphysical. To understand why the CIA would dare to cloak an occult initiation under the title of experiment, we have to step back into the shadows of that era. Because only there, in the paranoia of psychic espionage and the hunger for ultimate control, does the gateway begin to make sense. And that takes us straight into the origins of its shadowy birth. The Cold War was more than missiles pointed across oceans. It was a war for the invisible. Behind the curtain of politics, the CIA plunged into hidden worlds where ideas could be as dangerous as bombs. The obsession wasn't just about outspending the Soviets in steel and oil, it was about mastering the unseen battlefield of the mind. The Gateway Process CIA became part of this fever, a secret parallel to programs like MK-Ultra Gateway and CIA mind control experiments. While the newspapers spoke of espionage and nuclear standoffs in the hidden chambers, officers whispered of the Gateway Process secret, a ritual that could weaponize consciousness itself. The story usually told about Cold War intelligence is one of satellites and spies, but beneath that was a stranger war. Both the US and the Soviets hunted psychic phenomena with the same urgency they hunted missiles. Remote viewing, telepathy, astral projection, these weren't just curiosities, they were seen as tools of national survival. Imagine being an agent tasked not with carrying a gun, but with leaving your body to scan enemy bases. The CIA remote viewing experiments weren't fringe. They were funded, logged, and tested. And within that landscape, the CIA Gateway explained itself became a shining jewel, part science, part forbidden ritual, part weapon. MK-Ultra is remembered as a scandal of drugs and broken lives, but it was only one branch of a darker tree. Where LSD and hypnosis failed, the Gateway Process tapes promised results. Instead of chemicals, they used sound, binaural beats designed to split the hemispheres of the brain, inducing altered states. The Gateway Process, CIA declassified reports show how far they were willing to push, testing not only psychology, but also metaphysics. This wasn't about calming soldiers. It was about turning human consciousness into a tool sharp enough to pierce walls, borders, even time itself. And in that pursuit, they stumbled into realms that felt less like science and more like sorcery. To grasp their desperation, picture the era. Soviet laboratories rumored to be experimenting with telekinesis, psychic assassins, and astral spies. For the CIA, ignoring these claims wasn't an option. So the Gateway Project became their hidden counterstrike. They didn't call it a forbidden gateway ritual in official memos, but those who lived it described it that way later. It wasn't simply about exploring altered states. It was about outmaneuvering an enemy on a battlefield that nobody could see. The Gateway Process document looked like research, but its undertones echoed with the hum of ritual invocation, something the Cold War had no language for. This context is vital because it reframes what we thought the government was doing. They weren't just defending borders, they were poking holes in reality itself. The CIA's consciousness manipulation projects were not isolated curiosities. They were chapters in a book of secret government rituals, written in a time when paranoia justified everything. Soldiers were trained for combat, but some recruits were trained to leave their bodies. Politicians debated policies, but hidden agencies debated how far the soul could travel. The Cold War demanded weapons, and the esoteric Gateway Process looked like one the enemy would never expect. Yet even in those shadows, one truth lingered. What they uncovered was older than the Cold War. Remote viewing wasn't invented in the 70s, and astral projection wasn't born in Langley. The Gateway Process explained looked new because it wore the mask of science, but its skeleton was ancient. The CIA mystical experiments mirrored shamanic journeys, the chants of Egyptian priests, and hermetic rituals whispered for centuries. The Cold War didn't create the occult. It simply gave it a new uniform, a badge, and a budget. And once those frequencies began to hum, the CIA discovered they had resurrected something humanity had always known, but long forgotten. And so, the shadows of geopolitics give way to something stranger. The revelation that what seemed like science was actually the rediscovery of an esoteric blueprint. The Cold War's paranoia pushed the CIA toward forgotten doorways, but what they found wasn't Soviet. It was ancient. It was the skeleton key of consciousness that shamans and mystics had always guarded. Which brings us directly to the next step, uncovering the blueprint itself, the hidden architecture of the mind written in vibration, resonance, and ritual. If the Cold War shadows explained why the CIA pursued the gateway process, the esoteric blueprint explains how, on the surface, the manuals spoke of brain hemispheres and focus states, but between the lines there was something older, an echo of forgotten temples and initiatory rites. The gateway process explained didn't just describe neurological states, it outlined a ritual map, a chart of consciousness as precise as any architectural drawing. The gateway process, CIA declassified document, resembled less a scientific paper and more a codex, diagrams of frequencies, thresholds, and resonances that mirrored the steps once guarded by shamans, monks, and priests of Egypt. This was not innovation, it was resurrection. At the heart of this blueprint were frequencies, binaural beats that shifted perception, like turning a key in an ancient lock. Scientists described it clinically, noting how the brain responded when each ear was given slightly different tones, but the initiates of old would have recognized it instantly. To them, these weren't beats, they were gateways, vibrational bridges to the astral plane. The gateway process binaural beats were a rediscovery of tools used by Hermetic magicians or Siberian shamans who drummed in caves to reach altered states. The CIA may have dressed it as physics, but it was, in essence, an occult ritual modernized. Participants reported that once the resonance was achieved, their bodies dissolved into lightness, their minds spread out like ripples in water. This wasn't imagination. It was initiation. The gateway process CIA consciousness experiment charted this as hemisync, but what it truly echoed was the ancient practice of aligning subtle bodies with cosmic rhythms. Egyptian priests once used chants for the same effect, while Tibetan monks employed overtones to create harmonic shifts in consciousness. The CIA, without realizing, or perhaps realizing too well, was recreating the skeleton of esoteric gateway processes long whispered in hidden orders. What made this blueprint so unsettling was not just its effectiveness, but its universality. Whether in monasteries of the East or the rites of Mesoamerica, the same formula appeared: vibration, focus, separation, transcendence. The gateway process secret was simply that the US or government had stumbled upon what humanity had always known. The document read like a mirror, reflecting back at every tradition that ever spoke of leaving the body or touching the infinite. Shamans called it soul flight. Mystics called it union with the divine. The CIA called it remote viewing. Same doorway, different names, and here lies the paradox. Once frequencies were unlocked, consciousness behaved like light refracted through a prism, splitting into dimensions both strange and familiar. The CIA occult knowledge embedded in this blueprint revealed states where time bent, space blurred, and the self seemed infinite. The manuals reduced this to wave patterns and focus levels, but those who practiced felt the truth. This wasn't brain science. It was an initiatory rite disguised in charts. To those who understood, the gateway process initiation wasn't about performance metrics. It was about crossing thresholds older than civilization itself. Consider what that means. The CIA, in its desperation, had given modern language to ancient techniques, stripping them of their myths but leaving their power intact. It was like finding a cathedral, removing its stained glass, and calling it a laboratory. The CIA mystical experiments made no mention of gods, yet the experiences mirrored encounters with archetypes, spirits, and forces beyond comprehension. And that's the blueprint's hidden danger. When you approach it as science, you forget the reverence. And without reverence, ritual becomes raw power, unstable, dangerous, even consuming. This is why the blueprint cannot be viewed in isolation. It isn't just about binaural beats or frequencies. It's about what comes after. Once resonance is achieved, once the energy body expands, the process demands progression. The blueprint was only the beginning. the true ritual mechanics awaited. And just as in ancient mystery schools, every initiation step leads to a deeper one, which is why the gateway didn't stop at theory. It demanded practice, a sequence of steps that mirrored the structure of occult rites. And that's where the ritual mechanics unfold. Once you hold the esoteric blueprint in your hands, you realize it isn't meant to be read like a manual. It's meant to be enacted like a rite. The gateway process, explained, unfolds in a series of stages that mirror the liturgy of initiation schools, where every gesture, every vibration carries symbolic weight. The CIA stripped it of its sacred context, calling it focus levels and hemisync. But behind those sterile words lived the same heartbeat found in mystery traditions. The CIA gateway ritual was never random. It was step-by-step choreography, guiding the initiate from the limits of the body into the wide abyss of the astral. It began with resonance. Participants would lie still, guided by gateway process binaural beats until their inner vibrations aligned. This wasn't just relaxation, it was tuning the human instrument, like striking the first note of a hymn. Ancient rites demanded chants or drums. The CIA demanded tones through headphones. Once resonance set in, alignment followed, a sense of the physical body melting into the field of energy. This was not described as mystical, but anyone who has experienced it will tell you it feels like kneeling at the altar of the unknown. The second stage was alignment, the harmonizing of inner and outer frequencies. Here, the body became transparent, awareness sharpened, and participants often reported floating or weightlessness. In official language, it was data collection, but in truth it echoed the gateway process initiation known to shamans and occultists. Alignment was the opening of the gate, the first step toward separation. Just as priests once purified themselves before entering the temple, the initiate of the gateway cleared their mental field, preparing for a threshold crossing that could not be undone. Next came expansion. Once resonance and alignment stabilized, participants felt their energy bodies stretch outward, rippling across space. Imagine your awareness no longer confined to your skull, but expanding through walls, cities, even landscapes. The CIA astral projection techniques were catalogued clinically, but lived like mystical breakthroughs. Energy body expansion wasn't just a trick, it was liberation. Many described it as standing outside themselves, finally realizing the body was a vehicle, not a prison. And with that realization, the most dangerous step arrived: separation, astral projection, the ultimate leap in the CIA out-of-body experience. This wasn't theory, it was practice. Participants left their bodies and traveled, reporting visions of distant cities, symbols, even encounters with beings. In science, this was remote viewing. In ritual, it was the soul's exodus. Mystery schools once swore secrecy about this stage, for it was here that one risked dissolving humanity itself. The CIA may have wanted intelligence, but what they unlocked was initiation, the kind that once required years of training, now compressed into tapes and techniques. And yet, stripped of sacred context, these steps grew dangerous. Without myth, without guardians, the rite became raw, unpredictable. The gateway process, CIA declassified reports rarely mention danger, but whispers from insiders speak of panic, hallucinations, even entities waiting at the edges of perception. That's the nature of ritual. Once opened, the gate cannot be closed by science alone. To expand the energy body is to knock on doors that have been closed for centuries. And those doors, once ajar, do not always open into friendly rooms, which leads us naturally to the forbidden divide, the place where science ends and the abyss begins. For when resonance shifts into projection, when frequencies become thresholds, the initiate crosses into realms that dismantle reality itself. The forbidden gateway ritual was not only about leaving the body, it was about facing truths so profound they threatened to erase identity. And if the ritual mechanics served as the ladder, what lay beyond was nothing less than the abyss itself, waiting to be crossed. Crossing the threshold was never meant to be safe. The gateway process, CIA declassified reports describe astral projection as if it were a scientific exercise, but those who lived it knew it was something else entirely. They weren't just leaving their bodies, they were dismantling the illusion of physical reality itself. The CIA astral travel sessions pulled back the curtain, revealing a world where the material was only a thin veil, easily torn. Ancient traditions called this breaking of the cosmic egg, a shattering of the illusion that the world was solid, permanent, and real. Once you cracked it, nothing could be the same. Participants spoke of falling into vast darkness, like slipping into the hollow of a black hole. Scientists wrote about altered brain states, but mystics would have recognized it as the black hole within the self. This was the secret heart of the gateway process ritual, not simply to project outward, but to collapse inward, dissolving the ego into something infinite. The CIA wanted intelligence reports, but the experience gave initiates visions of eternity, and eternity is not a place you return from unchanged. Every step was liberation, but also annihilation. The gateway process secret was that transcendence could feel like death. To leave the body was to confront the void, and the void whispered back. For some, this was liberation, the realization that the body was only a vessel, and consciousness could exist without it. For others, it was terror, the fear that stepping too far meant never coming back. The CIA metaphysical secrets hinted at this paradox, but buried it under technical language. Yet those who crossed the divide spoke of one truth. Freedom and destruction are two sides of the same coin. This is why so many esoteric traditions warned of the risks. The shamans spoke of losing one's soul. The hermeticists warned of becoming trapped in illusion. And still, the CIA pushed forward, convinced the gateway process explained was a tool they could control, but the divide cannot be mastered by charts. Once consciousness unravels, you cannot order it back into a box. The esoteric ritual explained wasn't simply about expansion, it was about exposure. Exposure to forces that were never meant to be handled by bureaucracy, much less weaponized. Those who dared reported visions that blurred the line between mysticism and madness. Time dissolved, identities melted, and landscapes twisted into endless spirals. Some swore they touched the core of creation itself. Others claimed they met beings that stood as guardians of the divide. The CIA mystical experiments weren't simply scientific missteps. They were initiations conducted without initiation, and that made them perilous. Because beyond the divide, you no longer encounter theories, you encounter presences, and presences have a way of noticing you back. The paradox is cruel. On one hand, the gateway process CIA gave glimpses of transcendence, moments of soaring beyond the flesh, tasting a freedom untouched by governments or elites. On the other, it threatened to dissolve humanity itself, leaving initiates unmoored, fractured, haunted. That's why many whispered that the ritual was not a scientific process, but a gamble. One could emerge enlightened or lost forever. And isn't that the very definition of forbidden knowledge? To cross a line no one was supposed to touch, and yet the abyss was never empty. Those who stepped beyond spoke of watchers, entities, and forces waiting on the other side. Some called them guardians, others called them parasites. Whatever their nature, they became the next stage in the story. Because the gateway process initiation did not end with projection, it began a dialogue with intelligences beyond human comprehension. And that leads us to the invisible gatekeepers, the beings who linger at the edge of the divide, deciding who may pass and who must be devoured. They say that when you cross a threshold, you never walk alone. The CIA gateway process documents describe projection as if it were a solitary journey, charts of waves, focus states, and binaural beats. But those who crossed the divide told a different story. They spoke of presences waiting in the silence, watching as consciousness slipped from the body. The CIA astral projection experiments became less about travel and more about encounter. Something or someone was always there. And the question haunted every initiate. Were these protectors of reality or predators feeding on the reckless? Reports emerged of archetypal figures, shadowy watchers, radiant beings of impossible size, and entities whose forms dissolved as soon as you looked at them. Some described guides who seemed benevolent, whispering truths and symbols. Others encountered forces that felt parasitic, draining, as though the human mind itself was food. The CIA remote viewing programs avoided calling them entities, but the whispers called them invisible gatekeepers. Every journey through the gateway process CIA declassified files hinted that something on the astral plane was interactive, and once you were seen, you could never be unseen. In esoteric traditions, these beings are nothing new. Gnostics warned of archons, guardians of the cosmic prison. Shamans warned of trickster spirits waiting to entrap wandering souls. The CIA mystical experiments stumbled into the same archetypes, but dressed them in psychological terms. Yet the encounters were too consistent to ignore. The gateway process secret wasn't just about projection. It was about entering a realm inhabited by intelligences that challenged the very definition of reality. To call it hallucination was convenient. To admit it was contact was terrifying. Imagine lying in a government lab, headphones on, while your awareness drifts outward. Suddenly, you sense something vast, intelligent, aware of you. The scientists scribbled data, but you feel presence pressing in. Some called it angels, others demons, but all agreed it was undeniable. The forbidden knowledge CIA documents never used religious language, yet they described phenomena identical to mystical encounters. And that's the danger. Once contact is made, you cannot explain it away. You have entered a dialogue with forces older than humanity. Some initiates returned shaken, claiming they had been tested, asked questions, shown visions, forced to prove worth. Others described oppression, like being trapped in mazes of shifting symbols. The esoteric government experiments didn't account for this. They wanted intelligence gathering but the astral world is not a library. It is a guarded citadel. The CIA occult knowledge gained through these encounters was not clean or safe. It was filtered through gatekeepers who seemed to decide who could pass and who must turn back. Science had no defense for that. The danger was not only in the beings themselves, but in what they implied. If gatekeepers exist, then the astral isn't neutral. It's structured, policed, perhaps even imprisoned. The gateway process initiation looked less like exploration and more like trespassing. And the presence of watchers hinted at something darker. Maybe human souls are not as free as we believe. Maybe there is a machinery of entrapment, guarded by these forces, ensuring that transcendence remains elusive. And perhaps the CIA glimpsed that architecture in their darkest moments, which brings us to the chilling cosmology whispered in occult circles, that the soul is not free at all, but bound in cycles of reincarnation, trapped in a prison of light and illusion. The dark occult CIA secrets may have brushed against this truth. The Watchers may not be random guardians, but jailers. And if the astral has jailers, then there must also be a prison. That prison, according to esoteric traditions, is ruled by Saturn, mirrored by the moon, and lit by the deceptive sun. And so the next revelation emerges, the Saturnian prison theory. The further the CIA pushed into the astral, the more their findings seemed to echo forbidden cosmologies whispered for millennia. The gateway process CIA wasn't just about projecting awareness. It was about confronting the possibility that reality itself is a prison. Mystics had long warned of Saturn as the warden, the cosmic judge who binds souls to cycles of suffering. In the CIA occult ritual framework, this became a terrifying possibility, that the human journey wasn't toward freedom, but entrapment. The gateway process secret hinted at glimpses of machinery beyond comprehension, as though initiates were seeing the gears of reincarnation grinding endlessly. Traditions as far back as the Gnostics spoke of archons, entities that fed on the energy of souls trapped in the cycle. The CIA mystical experiments described encounters with watchers that mirrored these myths almost perfectly. Was it coincidence? Or had the CIA astral projection techniques accidentally stumbled into the same prison walls mystics had described centuries before? The Saturnian sphere became more than a planet. It was the symbol of confinement, the ringed gatekeeper of existence. And within that framework, every astral traveler risked becoming not an explorer, but a prisoner marked for return. The moon appeared in these traditions as the mirror, reflecting the soul back into flesh, recycling consciousness into the same game of birth and death. Some initiates of the gateway process CIA declassified programs reported visions of the moon as an artificial reflector, a mechanism rather than a celestial body. The sun, too, was reinterpreted, not as giver of life, but as a cage of light. The esoteric government experiments framed these as symbolic hallucinations, but for the mystics, they were glimpses of truth. A prison isn't less real just because it glows. The forbidden CIA files contain discussions of reincarnation that seem almost out of place in scientific documents. Why would a government agency care about cycles of rebirth? Unless, of course, They had evidence that consciousness could break free or be forever bound. For the elites running these programs, the gateway process explained was not just about exploration, it was about control. If the soul is trapped in a system ruled by Saturn, and the CIA had even partial knowledge of that, then the experiment was never neutral. It was an attempt to weaponize metaphysical imprisonment. Imagine realizing that your life, your memories, your identity are not entirely yours, that they are recycled fragments, replayed through the machinery of a cosmic cage. That is what some initiates reported upon returning from the CIA astral travel sessions. They didn't describe foreign bases or military secrets. They described glimpsing the prison itself. The CIA hidden knowledge suggested that perhaps the elites wanted this awareness not for liberation, but for domination. Because knowledge of the prison means knowledge of how to keep others locked inside. And here lies the most unsettling implication. If the gateway process was a ritual of initiation, then the prison was the final revelation. To see Saturn as the judge, the moon as the mirror, the sun as the cage, is to understand that escape is not easy. Liberation requires more than projection. It requires transcendence beyond the guardians, beyond the cycles, beyond the architecture itself. The gateway process initiation was never about simply traveling. It was about confronting the truth that humanity might be ensnared in cosmic machinery it barely understands. Which brings us to the elites who funded and absorbed this knowledge. For if the CIA gateway ritual truly revealed the Saturnian prison, then those who control the process control the keys. And keys, in the hands of power, are rarely used for liberation. They are used for dominance. The next step in this story is to ask, what did the elites do with the ritual once they realized its implications? Did they abandon it, or did they absorb it into deeper black projects, designed not to free humanity, but to keep it bound? The gateway process didn't vanish when the Cold War ended. That's the illusion. The idea that once files were declassified, the ritual was abandoned. In truth, knowledge of this magnitude is never discarded. It's absorbed. The CIA gateway process moved from public shadows into deeper black projects, hidden under the weight of secrecy and funding. For the average citizen, the story ended with a declassified document. For the elite, it was only the beginning. The Forbidden Gateway ritual had proven itself too potent, too transformative, to ever be left alone. Consider how power operates. When something can free the masses, it is hidden. When something can enslave, it is weaponized. The gateway process secret straddled both possibilities. For the human soul, it was liberation, a map out of the cosmic cage. But for the elites, it was leverage, a way to manipulate, control, and even trap consciousness on command. The CIA occult knowledge gathered through these experiments was not just stored, it was filtered into the hands of secret societies and programs that existed above governments. The ritual of control had begun. History is full of examples. Sacred knowledge once reserved for mystics was twisted by kings and priests to justify empires. The gateway process, CIA declassified document, became just another chapter in that long tradition. Imagine the same frequencies that could elevate an individual, now used to pacify populations. Imagine astral projection rebranded as entertainment or diluted into self-help tapes, while the deeper mechanics remained locked away. This is how elites control, by offering crumbs while feasting on the loaf. The secret CIA experiments were never about freedom. They were about monopoly over transcendence. And when you examine modern structures of power, you can almost hear the hum of the gateway process binaural beats hidden behind the curtain. Programs disguised as wellness, technology that distracts rather than awakens, media that hypnotizes rather than enlightens. Isn't it strange how so many tools today seem designed to manipulate consciousness? The consciousness manipulation CIA framework may not be gone. It may be alive in the very systems we interact with daily. The ritual didn't die. It evolved, and the elites became its high priests. The irony is sharp. While individuals yearn for freedom, those in power yearn for control. The esoteric government experiments were the bridge between both desires. To the public, the gateway process explained is just a curiosity, a strange footnote of the Cold War. But to the inner circles, it's an initiation rite into a deeper game, a ritual of control masked as science. The elites don't fear the prison. They want to master its locks. They don't seek to escape the cycles. They seek to stand above them, ensuring humanity never leaves. It's no coincidence that whispers tie these projects to secret societies, esoteric orders, and groups whose symbols trace back to ancient temples. The dark occult CIA secrets were simply the latest incarnation of an eternal hunger to monopolize transcendence. If Saturn rules the prison, the elites want his keys. If the astral is guarded by gatekeepers, the elites want to negotiate with them. In their hands, the gateway process initiation becomes less about freedom and more about hierarchy. Liberation for a chosen few, enslavement for the many. And so the circle closes in on a chilling question. What is the true nature of the gateway ritual? Was it ever meant to be science? Or was it always an initiation disguised for the modern world? The elites may claim ownership, but the mirror it holds up is for all humanity. Because in the end, the CIA gateway ritual reflects not just their hunger for control, but humanity's eternal longing for transcendence. Which brings us to the final reflection. Was this ritual a path to liberation or a gate that should never have been touched at all? The CIA gateway process was never just about intelligence gathering. It was a mirror, reflecting humanity's timeless hunger to pierce the veil. The gateway process, CIA declassified files, though dry on the surface, concealed something profound, an initiation rite disguised as science. In its rhythms and stages, it echoed the journey of mystics, shamans, and initiates of old, all seeking the same transcendence. The forbidden gateway ritual did not belong to the CIA. It belonged to the human condition itself, the desire to become more than flesh, more than history, more than the limits imposed by the world we see. In that sense, every participant became more than a test subject. They became initiates, walking the same path trodden by priests in Egyptian temples, yogis in Himalayan caves, and hermetic seekers under the stars. The CIA astral projection experiments were simply a modern mask for ancient practice. And isn't it striking that the same images emerge, whether in sacred texts or classified documents? The separation of the soul, the expansion of energy, the confrontation with entities, all the steps were there. The gateway process. Secret was that the government, knowingly or not, had retraced humanity's oldest steps. But if it was an initiation, what was its goal? Liberation or control? The esoteric government experiments walked a razor's edge. For the individual, the process could mean freedom, the realization that consciousness is unbound, infinite. But for the elites, the same ritual could become a cage, ensuring only they held the keys. The CIA occult knowledge carried both potentials. The ritual itself was neutral. Its use, whether as a map out of the prison or as a weapon of imprisonment, depended on the hands that wielded it, and power rarely chooses freedom for others. Perhaps the greatest irony is that the gateway process explained more clearly what religions, cults, and secret orders have hinted at for centuries. Humanity longs to transcend, to touch the divine, to break the illusion. But every attempt carries the same danger. What if the gate you open is not one of liberation, but one of deeper enslavement? The CIA hidden knowledge reveals a paradox. The same steps that could set you free could also tighten the chains, binding you to forces that thrive in secrecy and hunger. That is the initiatic risk. The gateway process. Initiation asks of every seeker the same question. Are you ready to dissolve? Not your body, but your certainty, your identity, your boundaries, your belief in what is real. For some, this is terrifying. For others, it is the only path worth walking. The CIA mystical experiments opened that door, but what stepped through was not always human. And maybe that's the essence of initiation, to confront the unknown, not as data, but as transformation. You never leave as the same person who entered, and so the gateway stands not as a failed program, but as a symbol, a threshold whispering still, inviting those who dare to listen to the frequencies beneath ordinary life. The dark occult CIA secrets remain hidden, yet the resonance is universal, a longing for transcendence that no government, no elite, can fully suppress. The ritual belongs to everyone, because the desire for freedom belongs to everyone. Whether it's called science, magic, or madness, it is the same path, humanity reaching for the infinite. But the reflection leaves us unsettled. Was the CIA gateway ritual a gift or a curse? A liberation or a manipulation too dangerous to touch? The answer is not written in documents, nor whispered by elites. It remains hidden in the silence between frequencies, waiting for those who choose to listen. And as that silence deepens, one cannot help but wonder, was this ever about human freedom or about unlocking a gate that should never have been touched? So now the question falls to you. What will you do with this knowledge? Will you treat the CIA gateway process as just another strange file from history, or will you see it for what it really is? An initiation into the hidden architecture of consciousness. Because if even fragments of this ritual are true, it means reality isn't as solid as we've been told. It means the gate isn't out there, it's inside you. Ask yourself this: if you had the chance to step beyond the illusion, would you take it? Or would you turn away, afraid of what waits on the other side? And here's the harder question. What if you've already stepped into the ritual without realizing it? Through the media you consume, the sounds you hear, the frequencies around you. That's the danger and the opportunity of this knowledge. Tell me in the comments what you think. Is the gateway a path to freedom, or is it a trap designed by forces far older than the CIA? I want to hear your perspective, because this isn't just about my voice. It's about building a community of seekers who dare to question everything. And if you're ready to keep going deeper, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit the notification bell and never miss what's coming next, because this is only the beginning. The whispers grow louder and the gates are waiting.